The shadow government. Quote, men occasionally stumble over the truth, but most pick themselves up and hurry off as if nothing had happened. End quote. Winston Churchill. A basic dilemma about how the average American views the role of the government regarding state secrets, such as UFOs, for example, is the fact that many Americans do not know how the system of hidden influences and manipulation works. The average person has been conditioned to think a certain way their entire life. In many instances, foreign immigrants being granted citizenship have a better knowledge of the legitimate functions of our government than most Americans born here. Civic lessons are no longer a priority in our high school educational system and are seldom found in college curriculums, unless one majors in political science. It also needs to be noted that the government, as the media and most people refer to it, is not a single monolithic entity. In reality, it is made up of millions of people, all functioning at different levels. There is an unstated assumption that if knowledge of UFOs exists somewhere in the vast bureaucracy, then the entire government is responsible for concealing that information. But like all large pyramid hierarchical institutions, inadequate communication within the ranks of government, especially between agencies, is a generic weakness. Because one person or officer acquires information, it cannot be assumed the same data is shared with others. In the highly compartmentalized structure of the agencies within the US government, there is strict need to know, access only, plus numerous additional top secret classifications. So it is little wonder most people in government jobs have no access to any kind of official knowledge to black projects, UFOs, or anything outside of their jurisdiction. Beyond the government of the United States and the influential corporations with which they have contracts, there is a cabal of extremely powerful people who are calling the global shots. There are only 287 families who own close to 50% of all the world's assets. Many of these family leaders control whole levels of different secret governments, depending on where the governments are based. This corporate cabal remains secret, and its influence over sovereign governments is illegal. In this country, the power of cabals is subverting the US Constitution, congressional oversight, and presidential powers. Their goals go far beyond the accumulation of greater wealth, since the core families have plenty of financial resources. What they seek to keep is geopolitical control. These are transnational entities who are power brokers beyond the Western countries. They control long-standing, continuing interests around the world and strive to keep certain subjects vital to their interests secret at all costs. No such agency. The National Security Agency, or the NSA, was created by a secret executive order under Harry Truman on November 4th, 1952. The NSA was a completely unknown agency to the nation until the 1980s, hence the nickname, quote, no such agency, end quote. The secret government was originally created as a buffer for the president, a protective device, so he or she could honestly say, I didn't know. Plausible deniability. While such secrecy originally seemed to protect the president from sabotage and other nefarious manipulations, it also prevented the executive office and Congress from fully knowing the truth. In the next decades, it served to isolate future presidents from any substantive knowledge of UFOs. According to numerous whistleblowers, the NSA is tasked to maintain communication with all extraterrestrial biological entities, EBEs, and develop the various U.S. secret space programs. The NSA is exempt from all laws which are not named in the text of that law, allowing them to be essentially a lawless institution. There was no formal procedure established for either coordinating or approving NSA operations, meaning they answer to no one. Their only guidelines are to stay consistent with American policies, however that may be defined. The National Security Agency was created in large part by the paperclip Nazis serving on its panels and advisory boards. The NSA, in conjunction with the Council on Foreign Relations, spawned its muscle to establish the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. It is not generally known that the CIA was originally formed by a presidential executive order to deal with the presence of extraterrestrials reported by the military. That task would transfer over to the newly formed NSA. Officially, the CIA was created to deal with national security issues around the shifting geopolitical alliances following World War II. Soon after the formation of these organizations, the United Nations was created in 1947. The UN was envisioned as a way to ensure nothing as heinous as World War II would ever happen again. Yet since the UN was formed, there have been more wars and conflicts than ever before. Somehow these conflicts always invite Western nations into combat. The mass media tells us the Western armies enter various conflicts to ensure peace. The statement that we make war to create peace is really doublespeak. If influential policymakers in our government sincerely want to make peace with other countries, why would we enter uninvited, create conflict, and kill innocent people? The CIA is responsible for most conflicts in the world, being the agency charged by the US government with protecting our national interests by interfering in and often destroying the governments of other countries. The CIA has become a criminal cabal based on Nazi principles and answerable to no one. It also hoards secrets that would benefit the human race. The NSA and CIA claim over 75% of the intelligence budget. Currently, one primary task is still alien investigation and communication. This department originally was kept under top secret classification in case any aliens were hostile to civilization on Earth. The Russians also have their own version of the NSA with which Americans perceive we are in competition. The NSA reasons that they cannot reveal the ET interaction with Earth society because it would result in economic collapse, religious structure collapse, and national panic, leading to anarchy. If the public cannot be told, Congress cannot be told. This completely covert group, top secret NSA and CIA, denied requests for information from President Jimmy Carter, Senator Barry Goldwater, Congressman Stephen Schiff of New Mexico, and even FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. While sometimes provocative information has been obtained via the Freedom of Information Act, the government behind the government still is able to keep a tight lid on the UFO issue by dismissing with contempt and mockery those who would press them on disclosure or conduct any kind of serious scientific inquiry. Documents clearly indicate that the secret UFO control group of human beings here on planet Earth is in collusion with one or more ET groups. It is very likely that there are countless levels and varieties of ETs, given the vast number of galaxies and even dimensions astrophysicists now theorize likely exist. It is also likely, as many contactees report, that most aliens don't see the destruction of our civilization or planet Earth as either necessary or wise. Wars, conflicts, and enemies everywhere are probably a myopic Earthling's viewpoint. The alleged national security issue regarding UFOs is bogus. Even if it were not, wouldn't more information be better than less? The ultimate secret. A primary top secret subject is the technology collected from crashed UFOs. In the early days, the US government and others, like the Soviets, were retrieving crafts and working to develop backward engineered technology. This is the term for taking remains from a UFO crash or instructions from an alien and attempt to build a similar craft. At first, recovery engineers did not know what they were working with, nor could they understand the technology. So it was a logical decision to classify these projects as top secret under the cloak of national security. But this logic is now so outdated, and yet the rigidity of secrecy has only increased. In the United States, the intelligence community has lied to Congress, eliminated whistleblowers, or used money, corruption, intimidation, and ridicule to silence people. This is what is called the inertia of secrecy. By doing this, they have painted themselves into a corner. Now, with more and more at stake, the secret government practices relentless psychological conditioning. Once they use enough false information or disinformation, fear is created around an issue. It is then easy to control the worldview on the topic, so people either remain afraid or regard the topic as so outrageous as to dismiss it outright. Orthodox religious leaders also viewed potential ET contact in a disturbing way. They simply did not know what to make of contact, nor what effect it would have on their religious teachings. The secret power brokers might also feel threatened by ETs. If you wear a lens of fear, everything looks frightening. If you wear rose-colored glasses, you see everything as rose-colored. So visitors from outer space can be perceived as a threat. You can begin to believe your own propaganda. Many people would say it is next to impossible to completely suppress this subject. Given the vast amount of information on the internet, this is correct. This fact amps up disinformation campaigns. Agencies and hired guns do their best to create a cognitive dissonance that ridicules any sightings or evidence, even the mere concept of a UFO reality. A fictional interpretation is encouraged in the movies, with hundreds of films and more to come. It is understandable that after 70 years or so, we are still in the dark and are intentionally kept in the dark. For example, one must wonder what could possibly be hidden in those 27 secrecy clearance levels above the office of the US president. That is a lot of room in which to hide classified information. A very effective program has been developed over the years to safeguard the fact that the United States government has ample evidence of our planet being visited by extraterrestrials. Pervasive fear restrictions have spawned our own secret space program. The first comprehensive disinformation campaign was called Project Dove. It was, and still is, a complex series of covert media operations by US military intelligence agencies to misinform the public. At times, the public and press are given suggestions that maybe UFOs are real in order to trick the public into thinking that what they are seeing are actually UFOs, when in fact, they are our own secret advanced aircraft. This tactic reinforces confusion and denial about both facts, that there are UFOs visiting our planet, and we have built, through backward engineering, our own anti-gravity spacecraft and other futuristic machines. In this form of counterintelligence, the public is given some actual facts. Starting in the early 1950s, film productions of UFO-related movies influenced public opinion to remain open-minded, while also allowing the black operations to keep secret their advanced aircraft. There has always been some form of cooperation between the government and the motion picture industry. The first cooperative venture was the movie called The Day the Earth Stood Still. It was a collaborative undertaking between the United States Air Force and the movie industry. Once again, why all the hoarding of this information? Once the US and the Soviets retrieved several of these exotic ET crafts, combined with technological knowledge we already had, they realized it would mark an end to the oil cartels, coal burning, and the internal combustion engine. It would be the end of transmission lines for electricity, because energy can be extracted from the vibration of the Earth itself, or from the fabric of space. That is not outer space, but the space all around us, and transmitted wirelessly, as demonstrated by Nikola Tesla over a century ago. In the 1950s, the Lockheed Northrop experimental craft were called flux liners, named that way because they could pull energy from the quantum flux field. The shadow power brokers knew this information meant the end of their oil monopoly, and it had to be covered up. It would be the end of geopolitical hegemony and would threaten the real power structure that has been running the world for a long time. Over $100 billion per year is known to be siphoned off from various US government agencies and used to support these secret projects. The shadow government's global long-term agenda is to grow the military-industrial complex from currently $1 trillion to several trillion dollars. Thus, they must maintain a manufactured enemy, which requires a massive defense budget to keep the wheels of industry moving under their control. The untouchable subject. Our duly elected government may no longer be concerned about covering up the truth about UFOs. Perhaps it is now beyond the oversight of Congress altogether, even if they tried to investigate the matter. President Bill Clinton told veteran White House reporter Sarah McClendon that there was a government inside the government which he did not control. Perhaps some people in the government have tried, but they have no power to disclose. Many believe that control over the UFO subject has been compartmentalized away from legal and constitutional chain of command oversight and control. Those who run the secret government, according to researcher Dr. Stephen Greer, are, quote, risk adverse, do not like significant change, and will not give up control and power easily, end quote. Thus, they can afford to be patient. After all, elected public officials, such as the president, just transient faces who will be gone in 4, 6, or 8 years. The government's alleged position on UFOs appears to have been controlled for the last 7 decades by an unelected group and is now firmly in the hands of industrialists. In reality, our elected government officials may have no more power to disclose the UFO secrets than the average American citizen. They may be totally out of the loop, as is illustrated by a story told about Clinton's Secretary of Defense, William Cohen. As recounted by Stephen Greer, Cohen was approached by an astronaut who gave him a piece of UFO evidence along with the provenance for the piece. Then the evidence disappeared. Cohen spent much time and effort trying to track down where this piece of evidence had gone, but he was unsuccessful. Another possibility is that the president has had death threats by the control group and does not have the courage to demand disclosure. Stephen Greer reports that a close friend of Bill Clinton's said to him, that is to Greer, quote, if the president does what you say, he fears that he will end up like Jack Kennedy, end quote. The theory of the president being threatened with death in order to keep him quiet is actually quite a regular theme in the UFO community, given the synchronicity of events surrounding assassinations. There are declassified CIA documents that claim President Kennedy was assassinated in part because he gave the order to declassify the ET presence only 10 days before he was killed. A related tie-in with the secret cabal is that only 7 days before his assassination, Kennedy cryptically said, quote, there's a plot in this country to enslave every man, woman, and child. Before I leave this high and noble office, I intend to expose this plot, end quote. Jimmy Carter entered the White House determined to release the UFO files, inspired by the fact that he himself had seen a UFO and had said so publicly. However, after a UFO briefing, Carter changed his tune and joined the cover-up side. He told actress Shirley MacLaine, quote, it was true, there were occupants in alien spacecrafts, and that he wanted to shine the sunshine laws on it to see how the people would react, but he couldn't and wouldn't. Carter stated, I don't see any reason to keep information like that secret, but there may be some aspect of the UFO information with which I am not familiar that might be related to some secret experiments that we are doing that might involve our national security, our new weapons systems. I certainly wouldn't release that, but if it were something removed from our national security, in my opinion, as president, I would go ahead and release that. I see nothing wrong with that, end quote. Carter clarified that if the subject involved national security matters, he wouldn't release that material. Anything the briefers would tie into a threat to the security of the United States would be reason enough for Carter to keep quiet, and that is what he did as president. History might record the disclosing president as a hero, but there is an equal chance he or she might be seen as a leader with remarkably poor judgment whose decision precipitated chaos. It might be these very human considerations that stop a president from releasing UFO information. The president who makes the ET reality announcement will face numerous unpredictable fallouts, possibly harming himself and his family, and quite possibly his entire presidential agenda being overrun by the ET issue alone. The Al-Qaeda boogeyman. After the end of the Cold War, the cabal realized another perceived national threat was necessary. They decided to create a radical group of extremists who would become the target to future advance a war on terror. Once again, the CIA was tapped as the skilled operative agency with their own bag of lawless terrorist strategies. A neoconservative think tank called the Project for the American Century released a document that would create a full spectrum threat for the entire globe. It spoke of creating a change in public perception, a transformation from no perceived threat to a global threat. The authors realized how long it could take to bring about such a change. The document said, quote, "The process of transformation, even if it brings about a revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor," end quote. America acquired its new Pearl Harbor on September 11th, 2001. Homeland Security and the Patriot Act were already awaiting implementation before 9/11, and soon after were signed into law without much resistance from the American people. Few objected when these restrictive and often ridiculous regulations, such as airport searches, went into effect shortly after what is generally regarded as the largest false flag operation in history. It was designed once again to invent a new enemy, to enrich the international bankers who fund both sides of all wars, as well as specifically to restrict the incentive and the ability to protest unfair government practices. The war on terror is fake. It is a manufactured boogeyman. Aggressive acts against the United States take place in countries we are occupying, in which we are imposing an uninvited presence. America has created its enemies with its aggression. Terrorism acts are merely blowback from U.S. violent aggression. Terrorism is a tactic. It is a desperation tactic used by victimized peoples trying to protect themselves from the invasion of their sovereign nations, the destruction of their cultures and economies, and the killing of innocent people. A war on a tactic is a nonsensical and dangerous notion, and one that has led us into open-ended conflicts with no achievable goal. The people who have set up these vicious scenarios are the elite global power brokers. With no actual threatening enemy to justify their vast military appropriations and imperialistic wars, the would-be controllers have created the boogeyman called Al-Qaeda. Terrorism is intangible and needs the label of a person, group, or nation. Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein functioned as the big bad boogeyman in the 1990s. Quote, "Simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction," end quote, said Dick Cheney in a speech to VFW National Convention on August 26, 2002. We know now this was a blatant lie. The latest blatant lie is the creation and funding of ISIS. While the American people naturally dismiss all of Osama bin Laden's statements, there is actually a ring of truth to some of his pronouncements after 9/11. He made a statement to Al Jazeera within days following the 9/11 attacks, denying any involvement. Quote, "The US government has consistently blamed me for being behind every attack," said bin Laden. Quote, "I would like to assure the world that I did not plan the recent attacks, which seem to have been planned by people for personal reasons. I have been living in the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan and following its leader's rule. The current leader does not allow me to exercise such operations," end quote. The bin Laden confession tape, translated and released by the US government, was used as justification to bomb and invade Afghanistan. It has many inconsistencies and is largely regarded as a hoax. The vast majority of people in the Arab world, however, also believe 9/11 was an American-Israeli inside job. Such is also the force behind the Islamic State, but the mainstream media and Western pundits make it seem ISIS arose organically in the Middle East. Osama bin Laden gave another telling interview in October 2001, again denying involvement in 9/11. Quote, "I have already said that we are not hostile to the United States. We are against the US government system, which makes other nations slaves of the United States or forces them to mortgage their political and economic freedom. This system is totally in control of the American Jews, whose first priority is Israel, not the United States. It is clear that the American people are themselves the slaves of the Jews and are forced to live according to the principles and laws laid by them. So the punishment should reach Israel," end quote. In the same interview, Osama bin Laden suggested that, quote, "the United States should try to trace the perpetrators of these attacks within itself, the people who are part of the US system but are dissenting against it, or those who are working for some other system, persons who want to make the present century as a century of conflict between Islam and Christianity, so that their own civilization, nation, country, or ideology could survive," end quote. But of course, Osama bin Laden was the face of the enemy, so these remarks were hardly reported. Quote, "It's easy to imagine an infinite number of situations where the government might legitimately give out false information," end quote, said Solicitor General Theodore Olson, whose wife Barbara was killed on 9/11. Quote, "It's an unfortunate reality that the issuance of incomplete information by government may sometimes be perceived as necessary to protect vital interests," end quote. Mr. Olson stopped just short of explicitly placing the 9/11 tragedy in the category of incomplete information. Now we have the Patriot Act, the long occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan, and 850,000 new top secret positions developed since 9/11, mainly in the Department of Homeland Security, which is charged with protecting US citizens while our government is waging the war on terror. As for pulling one over on the public, the best place to hide the truth is right out in front of those you are trying to deceive. controlling the flow of information. In the mid-20th century, the Western mass media was controlled by 86 small corporations who competed to deliver the best possible news. Through consolidation, only 6 companies run it today. It is a well-oiled, very streamlined, very controlled machine run by a very few people. This has set a dangerous precedent, as manipulated news no longer allows viewers to make informed decisions. All of these 6 media organizations have very close ties to arms manufacturers and major financial institutions. Each of these 6 media organizations primarily gets its information from 2 sources, the Associated Press and Reuters, both owned by the Rothschild dynasty. That is why there is no bad press about the World Bank or the international banking cartel reported to the population through these outlets. Public television, as its anchors often note, gets many of its stories from the independent television news network. The money cartels, who own the mainstream media, also own Monsanto and wish to outlaw organic food through the legislation called Codex Alimentarius. They also advocate using aerial spraying, and they hoard the world seed banks. General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades, that's GATT, and the World Trade Organization continue to push Monsanto's Codex Alimentarius food code. The Trilateral Commission was established in 1973 as a way to influence the emerging Middle East and Far Eastern nations. Its founder and primary financial sponsor was international tycoon David Rockefeller, longtime chairman of the Rockefeller family-controlled Chase Manhattan Bank and undisputed overlord of his family's global corporate empire. The Trilateral Commission was unique in that it brought the Japanese ruling elite into the inner councils of the global power brokers, a recognition of Japan's growing influence in the world economic and political arena. Trilateralists have been known to say the people, governments, and economies of all nations must serve the needs of multinational banks and corporations. To accomplish the purpose of supporting hand-picked political candidates to win upcoming elections, trilateralists mobilize the money power of the Wall Street bankers, the intellectual influence of the academic community, who are subservient to the wealth of the great tax-free foundations, the media controllers who are represented in their membership, and the Council on Foreign Relations, another Rockefeller-financed foreign policy pressure group. The CFR is similar to the Trilateralists and the Bilderberg Group, although the CFR is composed solely of American citizens. The Trilateral Commission can be said to be the Bilderberg Group dressed in another frock, because membership includes Japan's elite. Both groups have the same goals. Both the Bilderbergers and Trilateralists are post-World War II Axis-influenced secret policy groups. They have combined with British, European, and American Nazi counterparts and are working towards a one-world government, a concept first thought to represent an altruistic coming together to solve humanity's problems and live in peace. Unfortunately, absolute control and unregulated power drive these one world government advocates, which morphs a potentially lofty vision into a deranged dream. By spoon feeding selected information to the public, they can make up any reality they choose. We have been influenced collectively to ignore certain events in the world, such as 6 million people dying of starvation every year. Rather, we are encouraged to keep the blinders on, and we are distracted by the pressure to work long hours, produce, and consume. We are bombarded with heavy-handed incentives to make a pile of money and buy as many trinkets as we can to gain more status in society. And this is sold to us as happiness, security, and the good life. Lifting the veil on shadow groups. What good would it do to uncover these elite overlords and expose what they are doing? For starters, we could have a media that truly serves the people. It would allow substantial energy sources, the end of poverty, availability of nutritious food, and the emergence of a completely informed and empowered human race. More importantly, it would put the rule of law back into civilization. If we allow them to succeed, we may have a world in which our children will not want to live. But it does not have to be this way. We can end self-generating debt, starvation, wars, and unnecessary suffering if we can look beyond the great distraction of the mass media. A clear and present danger exists right now, and it deserves our urgent attention. The veil of secrecy that has ruled the world for centuries is beginning to be lifted. It is time to forget the imaginary constraints put before us. We are all people and we are all one, and the current crisis affects each of us equally. Where do we begin? First, we are spiritual beings, and as such, we have a better idea. Fear and violence do not ultimately succeed. Only love in its highest meaning succeeds. An idea cannot actually be attacked. Furthermore, the attacker is always coming from fear. To respond in kind is to give power to the perceived attack and keep the cycle of attack, counter-attack going. Instead, we have another choice: the power of our minds. Used in the service of healing and love, can neutralize the dynamics of hate and treachery. The energy of love, that is the attitude of seeing beyond a person's desperate acts to his or her spiritual essence as a kindred spirit, is very powerful. Choosing this attitude is the means to the end goal of peace. The idea of non-violent dissent, including the absence of hateful thoughts, has to be embraced first, and then appropriate behavior follows. The process is that we simply notice, but are not dismayed or immobilized by the chaos the collective ego has wrought, as described in this book, and now we know what not to choose. Thus, we can change our minds and see beyond our fellow human and our own mistakes. Since minds are joined, this is simultaneously offering a choice to all minds. More to the point, a truthful idea is powerful, invulnerable, and increased by sharing. From this choice to look beyond grievous acts and choose love and healing over fear comes clear guidance as to what actions to take or refrain from taking. In short, we need to treat each other coming from a state of love, not fear, and address the root cause of the problem, our unwitting, fear-driven compliance. We are not merely pawns in the game of life, but pieces who can move independently. It is up to each of us to change the world for the better by changing our thinking first. Do not accept tracking devices from the New World Order. Do not accept poisoned food or water. Do question any justification for war, and keep yourself informed through trusted sources on the internet and inspired publications. It is time to wake up from the collective ego's hypnotic trance of fear, and then free ourselves from the shackles of those who wish to keep us enslaved.